The whispers began in the fuel depots. In the third week of March, just as Burkina Faso launched its first fully state-owned mining consortium, fuel deliveries to the northern region started to slow, first by a day, then by 3, then by a week. No one could trace a technical issue, because there wasn't one. President Ibrahim Traoré sat in his underground operations room with his logistics minister and military intelligence chief. A satellite image blinked on the screen. Fuel trucks lined up at the Benin border. Dozens of them. None of them crossed. Traoré asked. The logistics minister shook his head. They've been sitting idle for 6 days. Customs clearance under review, they say. Traoré leaned back in his chair, not surprised, just disappointed. Benin had quietly signed a logistics agreement with France 2 weeks prior, a move Paris called technical cooperation. But the reality was simpler. France had found a lever, and they were pulling it hard. 2 nights later, a generator exploded at the refinery in Koudougou. The fire took hours to control. By morning, media outlets in Paris were already reporting gross mismanagement of Burkina Faso's energy infrastructure, citing anonymous diplomatic sources. Ibrahim stared at the screen in his private study. The headline burned into his mind: Traoré's populist dreams crumble under fire and fuel crisis. That afternoon, a senior intelligence officer arrived at the palace with a sealed brief. Inside was a wiretap transcript. 2 French diplomats had been overheard at a cafe in Lomé, bragging about quiet containment of Burkina Faso. One line stood out: "Why invade when you can just suffocate?" Traoré's hands tightened. He didn't call a press conference. He didn't threaten retaliation. He simply made a list. 10 names, 7 companies, 2 foreign banks, 1 embassy, and quietly he activated Protocol Echo. By the end of the week, French-backed NGOs began reporting strange visits from tax auditors. 2 major contracts in the telecom sector were suspended. The French embassy's power grid mysteriously failed during a gala dinner, and a Parisian energy executive was stopped at Ouagadougou airport and questioned for 6 hours over visa inconsistencies. The message was clear: Burkina Faso wasn't playing defense anymore. But Paris pushed back harder. Within days, economic sanctions were floated inside EU chambers, disguised as financial reviews, banking restrictions, trade reviews, frozen accounts. Even France's cultural attaché publicly questioned whether Burkina Faso had the governance capacity to manage its own growth. On live TV, that night Ibrahim met with Captain Yero and his closest economic advisor, Madame Koulibaly. "They're not just punishing us," she said. "They're trying to make you look unstable before the African Monetary Council meets next quarter, so they can block our regional currency push," Yero added. Old Ibrahim didn't respond. He walked to the window, stared at the capital. He whispered, "They're not afraid of my guns. They're afraid of my ideas." Meanwhile, in Paris, a secret meeting was held on Rue de l'Université. 5 men, 1 woman, all seated around a marble table. The topic was simple: neutralize Traoré without making him a martyr. And one name surfaced on the file they slid across the table: Operation Mirage, candidate Colonel Diallo. A name from the past, a former ally, a buried grudge, and a new French-backed plan to bring down the presidency from within. The first time Colonel Diallo entered the presidential palace in 2022, he was a rising star, young, decorated, charismatic. Ibrahim Traoré had welcomed him with open arms, calling him the future of our armed forces. That future ended 6 months later. Diallo was caught siphoning military funds to a private network with ties to foreign defense contractors. The investigation was classified. Traoré spared public humiliation, but stripped Diallo of command and reassigned him to a border post near Mali. Forgotten, silent, exiled, but not broken. Now 2 years later, the colonel was having espresso at a Paris cafe with a French diplomat named Lefebvre, and a civilian consultant with no LinkedIn history, and a security clearance too clean to be real. Traoré's grip is weakening, Lefebvre said, stirring sugar into his cup. "You're sure?" Diallo asked, leaning back. The consultant spoke for the first time. "We'll make sure of it." He passed over a thin envelope. Inside, a burner phone, a list of internal palace staff, and a coded phrase to be used if Diallo ever wanted to call in support. Diallo tapped the envelope twice against the table. "Just one question," he said. "Am I the front or the tool?" "You're the return," Lefebvre replied. "Of order." In Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré was reading a poem, not from a book, but from the wall of a school in Zone 3. It was painted in faded blue next to a broken window. "You can remove the chains, but if you still whisper for permission, you're not free yet." He stared at it for a long moment before turning to his education minister. "Why haven't we rebuilt this building? We've been prioritizing the North conflict zones." "Send 2 teams," he said. "One to fix the walls, one to paint over the fear." "Yes, sir." Back at the palace, Captain Euro intercepted a strange communique routed through a dormant frequency once used by the Interior Ministry's foreign liaisons. It was short, encrypted, but the signature line contained a single name: Diallo. Euro took it directly to the president. "He's back?" Ibrahim asked without emotion. Euro nodded, and not quiet. "He's been seen meeting former officers, retired intelligence staff, some NGO contacts too. Is he recruiting or being recruited?" That night, Ibrahim called a meeting with just 3 people: Euro, Madame Koulibaly, and Commander Basoli, head of internal threat assessments. "No arrests," Ibrahim ordered. "No raids, no leaks." "Sir?" Koulibaly raised an eyebrow. "I want to know who's watching me and who's watching him. But I don't want them to know I'm watching them." Basoli cracked a rare smile. "Operation Mirror." "Exactly." The next morning, Colonel Diallo was greeted by an old friend in a barber shop near the market. What he didn't know was that the man had already been flipped by Basoli. "You still got your fire, Diallo?" the man asked. Diallo grinned. "I've just been waiting for the match." They spoke for 17 minutes. Only one sentence mattered. Traore was a soldier. Now he plays king. The signal was clear. The colonel wasn't returning quietly. Meanwhile, in the French embassy, tensions simmered. Ambassador Chevalier had grown uneasy with the way Operation Mirage was evolving. "It's too visible," she told Lefebvre. "We're not dealing with a puppet regime. If this backfires, Traore becomes a symbol." Lefebvre smiled coldly. "He already is. That's why we can't afford to wait." In Paris, a fake think tank published a report titled "Stability Risks in Burkina Faso's Military Hierarchy." It cited unnamed sources. The same day, anonymous accounts on X, formerly Twitter, began posting clips of Traoré's older speeches, cherry-picked, misquoted, re-edited to make him sound erratic. Headlines followed: "Is Traoré losing control?" "Burkina's economic nationalism," "A time bomb," "Opposition rising from within." Inside the palace, Ibrahim watched the storm unfold on the screens in his briefing room. He didn't blink. "They want the world to see a weak president, surrounded by betrayal," Euro said. "Then we show them the truth," Ibrahim replied. A week later, Traoré appeared live on national television, but not from the palace. From a military base in Fadane Gourma. He stood in the rain, flanked by soldiers, not politicians. No teleprompters, no flag backdrop. Just his red beret, his field jacket, and the raw Sahel wind. "I have heard the whispers," he said, "that I have lost control, that someone else is rising, that the West is preparing my replacement." He looked into the lens. "I have no replacement." That speech sent shockwaves through the capital, but it also triggered something else. Colonel Diallo made his move. The very next morning, he issued a statement, unsigned, but broadcast via anonymous channels. It called for a restoration council to take power in light of Traoré's descent into solo rule. The message stopped short of calling it a coup, but it wasn't far. Ibrahim stood over a map with his generals and aides. "No arrests," he repeated. "Still, sir, he's gone public." Basoli said. "Yes," Ibrahim replied. "Low. Now let's make him come forward." He issued a challenge, a live public forum, one-on-one, Traoré versus Diallo, unmoderated, unedited, unfiltered, broadcast across the country and the world. The country held its breath. Would Diallo show? Would the West allow it? Would it be a trap?
The invitation was clear.
To Colonel Diallo, "You question my leadership. I will not arrest you. I will not silence you. I invite you to speak. Face me before the nation. Ibrahim Traoré. The broadcast was scheduled for Friday night at 8 p.m. Every TV and radio station in Burkina Faso cleared their programming. Live stream platforms set up backups. Viewership projections were in the millions. Even CNN and Al Jazeera reached out for rights. It wasn't just a showdown, it was an ultimatum in front of the world. At 7:42 p.m., President Ibrahim Traoré arrived at the national media headquarters. He wore civilian clothes, white shirt, rolled sleeves, no beret. His eyes were steady. His voice was low. But everything about him radiated steel. Captain Euro followed closely behind. No threats detected on entry, Euro said. But cyber intel picked up increased chatter. French IPs mostly monitoring the stream. Ibrahim nodded. Let them watch. Let them know this isn't about one man. It's about the message. 7:55 p.m. The anchor cleared his throat. Sir, we're 5 minutes out. Do we have confirmation from Colonel Diallo? Euro checked his phone. Nothing. Ibrahim sat calmly. He'll show, he said. But he didn't believe it. 8 p.m. sharp. The feed went live. 2 chairs. One occupied. The president adjusted the microphone on his lapel. Good evening, he said to the nation. I invited Colonel Diallo here tonight, not to humiliate him, not to trap him, but to offer what few in power ever offer, the chance to speak freely before the people. He looked at the empty chair, but the chair is empty. A pause, not for drama, but for honesty. He continued, we are being tested, not by bombs or bullets, but by shadows, sabotage, manipulation, sanctions wrapped in smiles, and yes, betrayal, some of it from within. The camera cut to a wide shot, still one chair occupied, but we will not break. Across Ouagadougou, people stood still on balconies, in living rooms, in cafes. You could feel the tension vibrating in the street. A country was holding its breath. In a luxury apartment in Paris, James Ellison stared at the screen, glass of scotch in hand. He flipped it on us, he muttered. The French consultant beside him said nothing. The silence said enough. Back in Burkina Faso, Colonel Diallo was watching too, but not alone. He was in an abandoned airstrip hangar with 6 men, 2 former officers, 3 bodyguards, and 1 European handler who had stopped pretending to be a consultant. He's turning it into a referendum, Diallo growled. I was supposed to be the alternative, not the absentee. The handler lit a cigarette. You missed your moment. No, Diallo said. I'm just choosing a different one. 3 hours later, the live broadcast had ended, but social media hadn't. Clips of Traoré's speech were spreading like wildfire, dubbed in English, Arabic and French. African diaspora communities reposted it with hashtags like #Africa will not bow, #Traoré's challenge, and #Stand with Burkina. Even accounts usually aligned with Western diplomacy hesitated to comment because the optics were clear. Traoré had opened the door. Diallo hadn't walked through it. The next morning, Traoré convened a small meeting in the garden of the presidential palace. No documents, no screens, just words. Madame Coulibaly was first to speak. That speech was a trap for them, not for Diallo. Euro nodded. Now the people believe you gave him a fair chance. And the West? Traoré asked. They'll pivot, Coulibaly said. They'll try new pressure points. They already are, Basoli added, as he approached. There's chatter about asset freezes, foreign accounts tied to your family, sir. Freeze them, Ibrahim said without blinking. Let them show how they treat independent Africans. Later that day, the Ministry of Intelligence decrypted a signal from an intercepted sat phone. Origin the outskirts of Fadden and Gurma. The message, proceed to phase 2. Media failed. Optics now irrelevant. Target extraction. It was vague, but not really. Euro burst into the situation room. Sir, we believe Diallo is preparing a military move. Not a coup in the capital, but a strike in the east. To capture a key base, trigger panic, force negotiations. What's the target? Camp Zores, a communications and weapons depot. Ibrahim stood up. I'm going. Sir, no discussions. Send the decoy convoy to the south. I'll take Bravo unit. We leave within the hour. Euro hesitated. then nodded. At 2:17 a.m., under the cover of darkness, President Ibrahim Traoré flew via unmarked chopper to Camp Zores with a 12-man unit. They landed silently, moved through the scrub brush, and positioned snipers along the southern perimeter. At 3:03 a.m., a convoy approached the north gate. Black SUVs, high beams, tactical formation. Diallo. He had come himself. Through night vision, Ibrahim watched from a rooftop. He saw Diallo step out of the car, armed, confident, flanked by a private militia, not army men, imported, paid for. Ibrahim turned to the comms officer. Jam the comms, isolate them, let him walk into silence. Seconds later, the radios went dead. Diallo's men noticed too late. From the trees, Bravo unit emerged, silent, precise, surrounding the convoy, without firing a shot. Diallo reached for his gun, but found Ibrahim standing 10 feet in front of him, unarmed. No more shadows, Ibrahim said. Diallo froze. Behind him, his own men lowered their weapons. The betrayal had come full circle. Colonel Diallo stood motionless, his boots pressed into the gravel outside Camp Traore, a faint layer of dust settling on his shoulders, like the weight of shame. Behind him, his mercenaries, the men imported, paid, and promised power, began to lower their weapons. No one had fired a single shot, yet the battle was already lost. Ibrahim Traoré stood 10 feet away, unarmed, his voice steady, his eyes locked on the man who once called him brother.
"Why you never needed to betray your country to prove your strength," he said. "But you did."
Diallo's jaw tightened. "You forced my hand." "No," Traoré replied. "You let someone else pay for yours." Around them, the presidential security team quietly moved in. No violence, no humiliation, just resolve. Diallo's gun clattered to the ground. "I won't beg," he muttered. "I'm not asking you to," Ibrahim said, "but you will answer." By sunrise, news of Diallo's capture had already reached Ouagadougou. But the story had changed. It wasn't Traoré survives coup. It was Traoré prevents civil war. The narrative pivoted, and fast. Regional media praised his restraint. International analysts grudgingly admired his control. Even some Western outlets, always skeptical, were forced to acknowledge the president's tactical brilliance. But in Paris, the fallout hit hard. Inside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, James Ellison received a two-word text from the ambassador in Ouagadougou. Diallo failed. Ellison threw the phone across the room. The plan had been airtight. Fuel disruption, economic pressure, character assassination, internal rebellion, all crushed in one night by a man in boots and a red beret. He turned him into a symbol, Ellison muttered. Damn him. But what Ellison didn't know yet was that Diallo hadn't just failed, he had flipped. In a secure underground facility beneath the capital, Diallo sat across from Ibrahim, hands cuffed, but expression clear. "I was wrong," he said. Ibrahim raised an eyebrow. "That simple?" "No," Diallo admitted. "Oh, but I underestimated you." "We all did." Traoré didn't smile. He didn't gloat. Instead, he slid a folder across the table. "Do you want to redeem yourself?" Diallo hesitated, then opened it. Inside were names, banks, transfer dates, passwords. It was France's entire shadow operation inside Burkina Faso and half of West Africa. "Give me the rest," Ibrahim said. "And I don't exile you. I don't execute you. I let you stay, in prison, in silence, with dignity." Diallo stared at him. "That's it? All that's justice." Within 48 hours, the file grew from 10 names to 67. 3 cabinet officials quietly resigned. 1 foreign diplomat returned to Paris for personal reasons. Bank accounts were frozen. Shell companies exposed. Traoré didn't brag. He declassified nothing. But intelligence services in Ghana, Mali, and Niger all received private data packets. A simple message attached: Africa is no longer for sale. Meanwhile, Madame Koulibaly convened a meeting with financial leaders from the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. With the immediate threat neutralized, she pitched the plan Traoré had long dreamed of: a sovereign Pan-African financial trust. No IMF, no World Bank strings, no colonial currencies. Built with gold, backed by resources, traded through digital wallets encrypted by local developers. Is this too radical? one economist asked. Koulibaly smiled. Good, that means it's new. At the French embassy in Ouagadougou, the atmosphere turned frostbite cold. Ambassador Chevalier's security detail had been cut in half by order of the Burkina Faso government. Her diplomatic movements were now logged and mirrored. Every dinner guest was screened. Every meeting was recorded. At her final briefing with Paris, she issued a quiet warning. If we push harder, we make him a legend. Well, Ellison didn't respond, because deep down, he already knew. It was too late. On the ground, Traore walked the streets again. Not in convoy, not with body armor, just in a white shirt, cap pulled low, hands behind his back. Vendors waved, children stared. One old woman whispered, "You remind me of Sankara, but with more patience." He laughed. "I'm just tired." But even his fatigue carried power. That weekend, Ibrahim addressed the nation from the rooftop of the newly reopened People's Broadcast Center. Once a station hijacked by foreign-funded media, now restored and renationalized. His speech was brief. "I will not always be president. One day, someone else will sit in this chair. But what we built these last few weeks must last longer than one man." He paused, scanning the crowd below. No more puppets, no more shadows, no more trades made in smoke-filled rooms. He looked directly into the camera. From Paris to Lagos to Washington, hear this clearly. The age of control is ending, and the signal cut to black. That speech, carried live across 6 African nations, was replayed endlessly by independent journalists and diaspora voices. It was translated into 14 languages. One magazine cover read, "The man who refused to bow." Another simply wrote, "Traore still standing." Meanwhile, Diallo sat in a concrete cell beneath the Ministry of Defense. He was allowed books, a desk, a radio. When asked if he wanted a lawyer, he simply said, "I don't need to speak again. I already said what mattered." One guard left him a pen and paper anyway. A week later, they found a short note taped to the wall. "You win a country not with soldiers, but with clarity. I tried the first. He mastered the second." The sun rose over Ouagadougou like fire over stone, hot, heavy, relentless. But the air that morning felt different, not just brighter, lighter. Something had shifted. Inside the presidential compound, President Ibrahim Traoré stood in his study, reviewing the final version of what his staff had come to call simply the doctrine. It was printed on rough paper, not for decoration, but for permanence. 10 points, short, uncompromising, carved from months of struggle, surveillance, sabotage, and survival. Yarrow stood at the door. "It's ready," he said. Ibrahim folded the page once and tucked it into his jacket. "No turning back," he said. Was there ever? By mid-morning, the press hall at the African Union Mission in Ouagadougou was packed with journalists, diplomats, military leaders, and a dozen cameras pointed like weapons at the podium. No one quite knew what was about to happen, but everyone knew it mattered. Traoré entered with no entourage, no flags, just a podium and his red beret. He began, "We've been called radicals for wanting what others are given by birth, dignity, control, and peace without permission. We've been sanctioned for refusing to kneel, accused for asking to breathe." He lifted the document. "Today we put it in writing." He read it aloud. "The doctrine of no return. 1. No natural resource shall be licensed to a foreign entity without full public review and majority domestic ownership. 2. All military installations within our borders must be under African command. No exceptions. 3. No currency shall be imposed or tied to foreign banks. Monetary policy is a national right. 4. All external contracts over $50 million will be translated into local languages and published publicly. Any government official found colluding with foreign agents will be permanently banned from public office. 6. Our national media will be 100% citizen-owned. No foreign equity. 7. No intelligence sharing with entities that refuse to share theirs. 8. Citizenship cannot be bought. Influence cannot be rented. 9. Diplomatic immunity is not impunity. 10. We welcome the world, but we are not waiting for it to approve us. The room went quiet. Then it went wild. Not applause, not chaos, respect. Some diplomats shifted in their seats, others nodded slowly. But the cameras didn't blink. They captured every word. And across Africa, the broadcast hit like a thunderclap. In Bamako, students gathered in front of dormitory projectors. In Nairobi, taxi drivers turned up the radio. In Kinshasa, shopkeepers paused transactions to listen. For a moment, it didn't feel like politics. It felt like alignment. In Paris, the reaction was almost instant. The French Foreign Ministry issued a statement calling the doctrine dangerously isolationist. CNN called it a populist fantasy. But the New York Times editorial board surprised everyone with its headline, "Traore has a point." Even Wall Street analysts admitted privately that the doctrine, while problematic, was not unreasonable, but none of them mattered. Not anymore, because something had broken. Not in Burkina Faso, in the spell. The belief that small nations had to ask permission first. Meanwhile, inside a sterile room at an intelligence facility in Geneva, a report sat on a desk. The new bloc post-Western African realignment. Underlined were 6 countries that had expressed interest in adopting portions of Traore's doctrine, and a 7th that had begun back-channel talks about replicating it completely. The old order was still there, but so was the crack running through it. Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim visited a construction site in the city's northeast district, once home to a French telecom facility, now being rebuilt into a Pan-African tech campus. Teenagers in safety vests waved to him as he walked past. One handed him a tablet. "Look," she said. On the screen was a meme. Traore mid-speech, his hand raised. The caption, "We don't ask to sit at the table. We build our own." He smiled. "That's dangerously well edited." She laughed. "It's already on 200,000 accounts." At night he returned to the presidential garden, his place of silence. Captain Yero joined him with 2 glasses of Bissap. "You should rest," Chero said. "I will," Ibrahim replied. Eventually, they sat in silence for a moment. Then Yero asked, "What do we do when the pressure starts again?" Ibrahim didn't hesitate. "We welcome it." A week later, Traore stood before a quiet audience of African scholars, students and elders. Not a press event, a classroom. "History doesn't favor the powerful," he said. "It favors the prepared." He walked across the stage. No empire ever admits its time is over. It fades by pretending it isn't. He turned to the room. "But we are not fading. We are not guests in someone else's era." He held up the doctrine again. "This is not a rebellion. It's a return." Across the border, in Benin, rumors swirled of quiet French moves to expand intelligence operations. In Togo, a French ambassador requested tighter strategic alignment on resource exports. But in Ouagadougou, the presidential office received a letter from the Ghanaian prime minister. 4 words, handwritten. "Let's build it together." Traore folded the note, placed it next to the doctrine on his desk. Outside, the wind was picking up. As the stars emerged above the Sahel, a child in a village school flipped open a textbook, the first to include the doctrine in its civic education chapter. He read aloud, "We welcome the world, but we are not waiting for it to approve us." He looked up and whispered, "Someday I want to write something like that." The teacher smiled. "You might."